Peggy Guggenheim was born into one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in the world, yet from the very beginning, her life was shaped less by privilege and more by loss, insecurity, and a desperate need to be seen. She was born in 1898 into the Guggenheim dynasty, a name synonymous with immense fortune and industrial power, but tragedy struck early when her father, Benjamin Guggenheim, died aboard the Titanic in 1912. Peggy was only 13 years old, and the trauma of losing her father in one of history's most infamous disasters left a permanent scar. While the rest of the Guggenheim family continued to thrive, Peggy grew up feeling emotionally abandoned, overshadowed by wealth she never felt worthy of, and trapped in a world that valued status over individuality. That inner emptiness would follow her for the rest of her life, no matter how much art, money, or attention surrounded her. As a young woman, Peggy rejected the rigid expectations of high society and fled to Europe, believing freedom and self-discovery awaited her there. In Paris and London, she immersed herself in the bohemian world of writers, artists, and intellectuals, desperately trying to reinvent herself as something more than a rich man's daughter. She worked in a bookstore, socialized with avant-garde thinkers, and used her inheritance to surround herself with creative minds. But beneath the glamorous surface, Peggy was deeply insecure. She measured her worth through the people she attracted, especially men, and sought validation through romantic relationships that were often chaotic, unbalanced, and emotionally damaging. Her marriages and affairs were numerous, intense, and frequently painful, reinforcing a cycle where love and suffering became inseparable in her mind. Peggy's greatest contribution to history came through art, yet even this passion was tangled with personal struggle. In the late 1930s, she began collecting modern art seriously, purchasing works by unknown or controversial artists who would later become legends. She supported figures like Jackson Pollock, Max Ernst, Salvador Dali, and Marcel Duchamp when few others believed in them. During World War II, as Europe descended into chaos, Peggy risked her life and fortune to save artworks from Nazi confiscation, smuggling masterpieces out of occupied territories. On the surface, she appeared fearless and visionary, but internally she was driven by a profound fear of irrelevance. Art became her identity, her shield, and her proof that she mattered in a world that had never made her feel truly loved. Her personal life, however, continued to unravel. Peggy's relationships were marked by emotional neglect, infidelity, and self-destruction. She often confused admiration with intimacy and power with affection. Even her marriage to Max Ernst, one of the most significant surrealist artists of the era, collapsed under the weight of insecurity, jealousy, and emotional distance. Peggy's children also suffered. She struggled to be a stable mother, and her daughter Peggy, an artist herself, battled depression and addiction before tragically taking her own life at the age of 41. That loss devastated Peggy and became the ultimate confirmation of her deepest fear, that despite all her wealth and cultural influence, she had failed at the most human responsibility of all. In her later years, Peggy retreated to Venice, where she lived surrounded by her art collection in the Palazzo Venier dei Leoni. Tourists admired her as a cultural icon, yet those close to her described a woman haunted by regret, loneliness, and unresolved trauma. She was often blunt, provocative, and emotionally distant, wearing her eccentricity like armor. Peggy openly admitted that money could buy art, lovers, and attention, but not peace. She spent her final decades reflecting on a life filled with achievement, yet overshadowed by emotional dissatisfaction. The art she preserved would outlive her, but the personal fulfillment she sought always remained just out of reach. Peggy Guggenheim died in 1979, leaving behind one of the most important art collections in the world, now permanently housed in Venice. History remembers her as a visionary patron who shaped modern art, but her story is also a cautionary tale about the limits of privilege. She had everything society claims guarantees happiness: wealth, influence, fame, and freedom, yet she could never escape her own insecurities. Peggy Guggenheim's fall was not financial or professional. It was deeply personal. She spent her life running from her past, chasing validation, and trying to fill a void that no masterpiece could ever repair. In the end, her legacy stands as a reminder that even the most powerful names can hide the most fragile souls, and that sometimes the hardest escape is from oneself.